From the east, house of light, may wisdom dawn in us, so we may see all things in clarity. From the north, house of night, may wisdom ripen in us, so we may know all from within. From the west, house of transformation, may wisdom be transformed into right action, so we may do what must be done. From the south, house of the eternal sun, may right action reap the harvest, so we may enjoy the fruits of planetary being. From above, house of heaven, where star people and ancestors gather, may their blessings come to us now. From below, house of earth, may the heartbeat of her crystal core bless us with harmonies to end all war. From the center, galactic source, which is everywhere at once, may everything be known as the light of mutual love. Ayum hunapku, eva maya emaho. Ayum hunapku, eva maya emaho. Ayum hunapku, eva maya emaho. Welcome to this, the seventh and final session of our Earth Wizards Intensive, seventh day, the seventh day of our intensive. Today is Kin 13, 13 Skywalker, Kin 13, Tone 13, Code number 13. So it's a beautiful day for the completion of our 7 days. And at this time, we just want to express to each and every one of you our profound thanks for your discipline in staying with us over these 7 days, and for listening, and for concentrating. For really, life is a sacred duty. And the more we apply discipline, and the more we exert ourselves, the more we are rewarded, and we are in the sacred path of God's divine plan. So I am extremely thankful, and I'm especially thankful to Chris Coleman, who really made this seminar possible for all of us. So please, let us acknowledge her for all of her profound work and energy and dedication. And also to Ruth and Coco, who have been with us for 3.5 months preparing, because they return tomorrow to Costa Rica to continue their work there as planetary kin. And then, of course, to all of the rest of you who I know have been very actively helping in the process. Whoops. Now, I'll open the Book of Kin, my favorite part, to read the kin for the day. We've entered, because it's a red day, we've entered a new time cell, which is also a new harmonic. We are in harmonic 4, electric output, express intelligence of service. Kin 13, red cosmic skywalker. I endure in order to explore. Transcending wakefulness, I seal the output of space with the cosmic tone of presence. I am guided by the power of navigation. We can take a moment as we read this cosmic tone kin for today and realize that it's guided today by the red earth. And there's a principle of the tone 13 day in that it connects totally to the kin that is the 4th tone of the wave spell, the self-existing day, because in 4 days it will be self-existing earth, and on that day the earth will be guided by the skywalker. That is a basic constant in the dream spell 4th dimensional circuit. The 13th day of the wave spell is always guided by the solar seal that will appear 4 days later as the self-existing tone. So it's the cosmic self-existing principle. And on the self-existing day, the guide will be that cosmic tone, the day that appeared on the cosmic tone. So this Skywalker, this cosmic tone 13, is guided by Earth, and in 4 days, the Earth is guided by the Skywalker. Then we turn to the prophecy Telektonon, and we open the reading for today in the synchronic order to the section 13. And we read, War of the righteous. Look carefully at my stone and listen. 10 messengers, 24 signs, for 10 are the number of orbits of planets around this star, Kanichahau, your sun. From my point of origin, your star is designated 24, number of the circuit of externalizing intelligence. If you are of the righteous, then in this is a sign for you of your star mission. And from each of the 3 oracle mouths of the arms of the cross of my Kuksan Sum, you will find 24 rays repeated 3 times, 1/2 the number of the elect. 3 times 24 equals 72. Add to this 3 times 11, 33, and the number is 105. The difference between the number of days in your solar orbit, 365, and the number of kin in my sacred count, my galactic spin, 260 days. 1320 is the ratio of natural sacred time. 1260 is the ratio of the false time of the Tower of Babel. 1320, 13 moons, 20 fingers and toes. 1260, 12-month year, 60-minute hour. Children of the day of truth, in this is a sign for you to discriminate between the power of the evil one who seeks to trap you in his machine and the power of the righteous who need nothing but that with which God has endowed them, their body of time and their natural path synchronized by 13 moons. Children of the day of truth, this is your only decision, for God knows and sees all that is in your hearts. People of the dawn, people of the book, on the hour of judgment, unify yourselves in the only way you can, in time, as time, through time. For this, in the year of Kin 144, Telektonon is revealed to you, God's plan for peace on earth. the last and only hope for spiritual renewal and salvation, immediate acceptance and adoption of the 28-day 13-moon way, the calendar telektonon. And he had a name written that no man knew but himself. Revelations 19:12. And that name is telektonon. Children of the day of truth, people of the dawn, people of the book, 4 square is my talking stone, invisible its design, its crystal lacing of star histories met in my human form. Time's special witness am I, seeking apostles of time to organize the day of truth into the revelation of God's redemption. Universal forgiveness awaits those who understand God's plan, a common time of 28 days, 13 moons, begun together at the appointed hour, on the day called lunar moon, the first day of the second year of prophecy. 2 solar faces there are upon my talking stone, the one an icon of my solar shield, galactic sun, the other, lunar sun, an emblem of the perfect lunar timing of Earth's solar orbit. Children of the day of truth, the hour of judgment has come. How much longer do you need to suffocate in the Babylonian exile of 1260 time? My children are the oppressed. Is it not time for the war of the righteous to restore equality? Why not wage the war that destroys altogether the old time? Why not smash the caskets of the Babylonian wine of fornication with a single stroke? Strong words. Life is a sacred duty. And finally, we turn to the dynamics of time, the 1313, because that's code number 13, tone 13. Spiritual realization, owing to facility in displacement, opens to psychozoic superconscious and the development of dual forms of radiosonic architecture. One form of radiosonic architecture is cultivated through deployment of the vehicles of time transport. Analogous or complementary forms to anchor the time travel vehicles are created from within the social biospheric matrix of the simple and highly sedentary culture of the evolving planetary art spore, the garden planet. We can look toward a future life of great simplicity when we can free ourselves from the bonds of materialism. And finally, yesterday we had been going over the Earth Wizard's Almanac. So today is Celio. It's the completion of the planetary moon. We're in the spirit tower of the wind, the spirit tower of joy, the 28th day of the planetary moon. And this is the day when this afternoon we will be doing the meditation, cubing the codon, to complete the first week of this 13-week quarter with the codon 59 dissolving. And because today was a new harmonic, we also had a new biphasic codon. So the biphasic codon for this 4-day period is wisdom of the people. It's codon 14. Conduct defines the way. And that codon has the sensory time within, and it has the telepathic vision without. Is it over there? Did they miss a cue? Missed a cue on the biphasic. No problem. Everything is impermanent. Every moment we can get up to speed, catch ourselves if we make a mistake, correct ourselves. And conduct is in the second strand, and it's the turquoise or light blue color, and it's a square with the downward pointing triangle. Unless I had copied it wrong, which is... Very good. So we all have to find our own way to approach the tools and how to use the tools. The reason we always say all of these are tools of how we enter into fourth dimensional time, a toolkit is meant to be used. So the only way you can make a mistake in the process is to not use the tools, to leave your dream spell box sitting on a table somewhere, to leave a telectanon box sitting on your bookshelf, or even with what you will receive today, the sacred trust of the 7777. What is asked of you is to study and to contemplate and to actually apply each day the synchronic order to discover what the codes are for the day. So the path has been laid out, and it is for our own intelligence, as it said in this harmonic, express intelligence of service. So what are we serving? We're serving the Holon. We're serving our fourth dimensional being, which was born whole, which will die whole, and which must learn to be self-disciplined and self-realized. So these are tools for you to find your way with intelligence. So we have much to, I know Votan has much to continue to present today, so we should move along here. And today's topic, 19 equals 260. Earth Wizardry of the Rainbow Bridge. And this morning, as we've done each morning, the context is Biospheric Islam, Quran, and the Law of Time.
For which reason I should say As-salamu alaykum, the words of peace be upon you, which is the traditional greeting of Islam. As-salamu alaykum. Thank you. And the topic today is a challenging one to many of both of our historic as well as our religious prejudices. That according to the law of time, that historically there were, as we pointed out yesterday, 3 messengers of the awakening: the Buddha, Christ, and Muhammad. And then according to the prophecy Telectanon, that each of these has a special voice. The special voice of the Buddha is Padmasambhava. The special voice of Christ is St. John of Patmos, who wrote the book of Revelations. And the special voice of Muhammad is Quetzalcoatl, the prophet of Mexico. In the riddle of the stone, it says, 6 seers listen while the 7th utters the name unknown. And that the 7th seer is Valum Votan. In the 20 tablets of the Law of Time, the first 7 years constitute the 7 years of what are called the 7 seers. The first year is dedicated to Buddha. The second year is dedicated to Christ. The third year is dedicated to Muhammad. This is the 3rd year. The 4th year is dedicated to Valum Votan, who is the 7th seer. The 5th year is dedicated to Quetzalcoatl. The 6th year is dedicated to St. John of Patmos. And the 7th year is dedicated to Padmasambhava. These are the 7 years of the 7 seers. The most challenging and problematic for many people to deal with is the 3rd seer, which is this year, the seer Muhammad, and who was Muhammad and what did he teach, and how do we speak of biospheric Islam? I don't think that concept or putting together of those words has ever appeared before as it is on your program. And so it's interesting that in the first year that was dedicated to the Buddha, which was the overtone seed year, that in this country here of the United States of America, I think in October of that year, fulfilled what the 20 tablets said. There was a huge cover story on Buddhism in America. So when I saw that, I said, well, that's what the 20 tablets says this year is dedicated to the Buddha, and there it is, Buddhism in America. We knew about Buddhism in America because since 1972, that I had studied under a Tibetan Lama, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. Bolonik began studying with him in 1973, and we continued our formal studies and practice until the death of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche on April 4th of 1987, and we attended his cremation exactly 52 days later in Vermont, and it was a very spectacular day with lots of rainbows in the sky. But that, for ourselves, that just completed what we needed to do of understanding the truth and the mission of the what's called the first messenger of the awakening. This is one, as we've continuously said, this is one earth. This is one whole. If there is only one earth, there really ultimately is only one truth and one teaching. And all the teachers actually teach the same thing. You cannot say that Buddha taught something different ultimately than what Christ taught or what Muhammad taught. There's a reason for the historical, there are several reasons for the historical problem regarding our understanding of Islam. Islam means submission to the will of God, which is peace. This is all that means. And that we find that in many scholars interpret a passage in the book of John, chapter 14, verses 16 and 17, to be the prophecy of the coming of Muhammad, where Jesus says to his disciples and followers that there will be another counselor, a paraclete, a counselor who will follow me, who will give you comfort. And this often is translated or interpreted to mean the coming of Muhammad. Muhammad came 570 years after Christ, and as Buddha, as I said, was 570 years before Christ. Christ is the marker between the first messenger and the last messenger of the awakening. Buddha did not leave, he didn't write anything. We don't really know ultimately what Buddha said. We go, nearly all the Buddhist texts say, "Thus have I heard." Once the Buddha was teaching on the Vulture Peak Mountain at Rajagriha together with a great gathering of monks and bodhisattvas and so on. But thus have I heard. Okay. And of Christ, we have the Gospels, which of course were all written after Christ's passing away or transcending, and that those Gospels were gathered, of course, by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then, of course, they were subjected to later treatment by different church councils, the Nicene Council, and so on. There's no doctrine of the Trinity within the Gospels. It doesn't say Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. That all was created by the Nicene Council in the year 325. And although Christ says, speaks of God as the Father and often speaks of the coming of the Son of Man, okay, he doesn't specifically say, "I am the Son of God." He doesn't specifically say that. That's all a function of the Nicene Council and the teachings then that arose from that were developed then that developed then into what came to be known as the Western Church and then the Eastern Church. The Eastern Church was founded in Greece, and the Western Church was founded in Rome. And the doctrine of the Trinity came up only after the Nicene Council in 325. You won't find that actually even in the Gospels, but we don't know if that's exactly what Jesus said either. As I said, I love to have my red letter Bible because I can just find the words of Christ, at least according to the four evangelists. But it was because of this, and of course, Jesus says very clearly that he came not to destroy the law, but to uphold the law. He criticized what are called the Pharisees and the legalistic rabbinical order of his time. Okay? But he didn't say he was necessarily there to found a new religion. He was only saying that they follow the letter of the law, but they don't really follow the truth. And any great messenger is always basically a reformer. Okay? He wasn't necessarily saying, I'm here to start another religion. And he was, but he was coming out of a particular tradition, which is called the tradition that actually goes back to Abraham. As I said in the Quran, it says, the Jews say Abraham was Jewish, and the Christians say Abraham was Christian. And how can you say that when Abraham was before both Moses and before Christ? Moses was 500 years after Abraham, and the Jewish tradition basically bases itself, at least in the Orthodox tradition, on the teachings of Moses and the Torah. But even what's presented of the Torah isn't complete in what's called the Old Testament. So 570 years after Christ then came Muhammad. Muhammad was born he was orphaned very early and in his life, and he was born about 569 or 570. It's not clear. When he was born as an orphan, he was raised by some uncles in his family, and then he was very fortunate that he married a relatively wealthy lady who became his patroness and wife, a lady named Khadijah. And he always had a very, very strong spiritual bent. Every summer he would go to the mountain and he would meditate in a cave. When he was 40 years old, he went to, in the year 610, he was meditating in the cave in Mount Hirat near Mecca when he was visited by the angel Gabriel. This happened on the 27th night of the 9th Islamic moon of Ramadan, and it's always called 13 years before the Hijrah that this occurred. And that on that night, the angel Gabriel, while he was meditating, the angel Gabriel came to him and transported him to the ends of the universe. And there in the single night, it is said that the whole of the Quran was pressed into his heart. And that then he came back. So a lot of Orthodox Muslims say that he was taken to the mosque of the Dome in Jerusalem, but actually he was taken to the far ends of the universe, and that the whole of the Quran was impressed in his heart. The Quran is really the teaching of Muhammad. The Quran, Muhammad was given the Quran precisely because it was said no one knew exactly what Jesus said. No one knew exactly what any of the previous messengers had said. The teachings that had been left behind had either been distorted or falsified, and so that there was the need to have one pure, clear, authentic text that was an absolute revelation from the angels of God, Gabriel, and from God himself to one human being that could then exist as the final criterion, the final revelation of the historical cycle. And so this was the purpose of the mission of Muhammad, to have the Quran revealed through him so that we would know, no, this actually came to this man actually wrote it all down, and he actually arranged it all this way so that we would know that there was an actual historical personage to whom this happened, to whom this occurred, and so we could say, yes, this is the final criterion. So this is the essence of the mission that Muhammad had, and he it took 23 years, one whole solar cycle, okay, in terms of the sunspot cycle. It took 23 years for Muhammad to write down all of the revelations that came to him. The revelations were all gathered together. The Quran actually means recitation, okay? And It was 13 years after Muhammad began to receive the Quran in the city of Mecca that he was greatly persecuted, and on the July 16th of the Julian calendar, the day of the rising, the Heliacal rising of Sirius, which is the same as July 26th on the Gregorian calendar, that Muhammad fled with a handful of people. He went from Mecca to the neighboring city of Medina, and this is known as the Hijra or the flight of Muhammad from Mecca to Medina, and this was in the year 622, which when that occurred. And then Muhammad had 10 years left of his life, most of which were then spent in Medina. He had to organize. He was under fierce attack. He had to organize several what we might call military campaigns, though by our standards today they could hardly be called military campaigns. They were just a gathering of people to take up and defend himself so that he could continue to receive the recitation. Quran just means the recitation. That's what that word means in Arabic. It's the recitation of God. Muhammad died at about the age of 63 or so in the year 632. And the last thing that he did before he died was to arrange the Quran. Now, the way the Quran is, it's interesting. This is a very key point. The way the Quran is arranged is different from the chronological order that in which it was received. He was instructed to arrange it in the way that we have it today. The Quran consists of 114 chapters, which are called surahs, and that's 114 is 19 times 6, and that the surahs generally, the first surah is the Al-Fatiha, the opening or the key, which is the 7 verses, which is the prayer, which is recited 5 times a day by the Muslims all over the world. Muslim simply means a believer or a follower of the faith, and that follower of Islam. The seven lines of the prayer begin with the Arabic lines Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim, and that which means in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. And the 7 lines of the prayer, very simply, are in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. Praise be to God, Lord of the universe, most gracious, most merciful, Master of the day of judgment. You alone we worship, you alone we ask for help. Guide us in the right path, the path of those whom you blessed, not of those of deserved wrath or of the strayers. So that's the essence. That's the practice of Islam, which is practiced every day, five times a day, and the performance of that prayer is referred to as a performance of the rakas, in which you bow in prostration. Okay, you go down to the earth, you bow in prostration, and you at the different times you do different numbers of those rakas. According to the Quran, this was the teaching that had been passed on actually since Abraham. As I said, that and you read in Jesus when he talks about the Pharisees doing the prayer outside in the temples or on the streets. That's the prayer basically that they're doing, or a form of that practice. And Muhammad basically considered himself as being fundamentally of the religion of Abraham. And you can read a number throughout the Quran that says, no, this is I am of the religion, say you are of the religion of Abraham, the monotheist, or the religion of Abraham, which is the natural religion. Well, in any case, he left the Quran after he had arranged it in its final form in the 114 surahs. He died, and that was in the year 632. The surahs, as they were arranged, as he was commanded to arrange them at the end, generally go from the longest surah following the first surah, which is a very important 7 verses, that then it goes from the longest surahs and generally going back down to the shortest surahs. The last 7th of the Quran, for instance, is from surahs 51 to 114. More than half the surahs constitute the last 7th of the Quran. The first 7th of the Quran is from surahs, includes surahs 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so it has an interesting composition, and there was a great deal over the next 20 or 30 years. There was a great effort to make sure that everything was conserved properly, and of course, as happened, there was a great deal of debate and controversy, and even though the message spread very quickly, there was no faster movement in the whole of history than the spread of Islam. Within 2 generations, Islam was in India, all the way from India all the way to Spain and the Atlantic coast. So it spread very quickly. The message was very brilliantly received, and the message of the Quran was very strong. It totally revivified and created the cradle of what is called the Islamic civilization in this area, which at its peak in the 13th century was very high level of civilization, very literate. Baghdad in the 12th and 13th century was the literary capital of the world. More books were produced in Baghdad in 1 year, around 1250, than virtually were produced in New York 10 years ago. But they were all produced by copyists, by hand, Baghdad was full of literary cafes where people came and wrote down, because they were processing all the knowledge that had been in Egypt and throughout the ancient Middle East there. But the core of it was the Quran, and what happened was that the historic Islam, if you read what Muhammad wrote down in the Quran, it just says all you need is the Quran, and it says very clearly that Muhammad was just a human being as a messenger, and a number of different places where you can read about the feebleness or the frailties of Muhammad, how for instance in Surah 80, which is called He Frowned, how it talks about how Muhammad was giving a teaching, and there was a very rich person there, and he addressed himself to the rich person and ignored the blind person in front of him, who was the actual spiritual person. And that when he saw the blind person, he frowned, and then the angel Gabriel said, hey, don't do that. It's not the rich one who's spiritual, it's this blind person in front of you who's spiritual. So it's very clear, it points out that Muhammad was very human type of person. But again, the perfection of what he brought through the Quran was to be the basis of what his teaching was. And what happened historically, and this is a very key point, immediately after Muhammad's death, people gathered together everything he supposedly said, and this is called the tradition of the Hadith, and everything he supposedly did, which is called the tradition of the Sunnah. And within 2 generations, the centrality of the Quran as the only basis of what we're supposed to be Islam was replaced by what is called the Sunnah and the Hadith, the sayings and the acts of the prophets. And then a type of priest class, the Imams, arose, and as a result of which many distortions appeared, and Islam was not based on the Quran. It's very similar, as I said, Christ didn't teach the doctrine of the Trinity. That was created 300 years after Christ. And the same with the Islam. Islam, as it historically developed, deviated from just the pure teaching of the Quran and based itself on the Hadith and the Sunnah. Incidentally, the Islamic calendar, which is based from the time of the Hijra, this year, which just be the current Islamic year, it's based solely on the lunar calendar. So the lunar year is different from the solar year. So this year, which just began on the last new moon, is the year 1421. Okay, it's very interesting because this is the resonant wizard year. The wizard is 14 plus tone 7. It's 21. But that's the current Islamic year. And then when we get, if you take the pure solar calendar count, when we get to this coming July 26th in the year 2000, it will be the year, actually the solar year 1378, 1378 since the Hijra, which is another interesting number because 1378 is a multiple of 13. It's 13 times 106, and 106 is the number of the kin of the, which is of the only kin on the north side of the tomb, which is kin 106, the lunar world bridger. Also, if you take from the Hejra, which was in 622, to the opening of the tomb of Pakal Votan, okay, in 1952, that is exactly 1,320 years, and that's a very interesting point because it struck me in all of my work with the prophecy of Pakal Votan. I was always struck by the fact that Muhammad died in 632 and that Pakal Votan cycle of power began in 631. And when I first went to Palenque, the first several times that I went to Palenque, I was always struck by the rich diversity of cultural traditions that actually appear in Palenque. That you have the cross, okay, the Christian cross is very clearly there. If you look at some of the tops of the temples, particularly the temple of the sun or the temple of the foliated cross, you'll see figures seated in meditation, just like Buddha figures. And in the palace of Bolonik, even the archaeologist Alberto Ruz says it's very uncanny how the arches are the same form as the arches that you find in Moorish architecture, Moorish Islamic architecture. I was always struck by how all of those traditions were present in the artistic forms of Palenque, and I was always struck by how, as I said, that Muhammad died in 632, and that the time of power of Pakal Votan began in 631, just a year before that. It seemed like there was a kind of like a handoff for that. And so in 1952, as I said, when the tomb was opened, exactly 1,320 years had elapsed since the Hejra, 1,320 solar years. And then 7 years after that, a man named Rashad Khalifa came to America. Rashad Khalifa was born in Egypt is on November 19th of 1935, and his seal is 7 dog, and his father had been a grand Sufi master in Cairo, but Rashad Khalifa came to the United States at the age of 24, 7 years after the opening of the tomb, and he went to graduate school at the University of California. He finally graduated with a PhD in biochemistry from the University of California Riverside campus, and in 1968 he was hired by the state of Arizona to be the state chemist. At that year, 1968, when he left the University of California system, I arrived at the University of California system. I arrived at the University of California at Davis. When Rashad Khalifa got his job as the state chemist for the state of Arizona, he said, now I'm going to do what I really want to do. He went to the United States so he could have complete scientific training, and then once he had scientific training and complete command of the English language, he said, now I'm going to do something that no one has done. And no one has ever made a translation of the Quran whose native language was actually Arab. The other translations of the Quran that existed were done by people, very good translations and interesting ones were mostly done by Pakistanis, for whose main languages was English and Hindi or Pakistani, but whose main language wasn't Arab. So Rashad Khalifa knew this, and he said, now I'm going to do what hasn't been done. I'm going to do a scientific translation of the Quran in English, and my language is Arab, so I'm going to be able to do something that hasn't been done, do a really modern translation. So he said he made a vow to himself that he would not translate anything until he completely understood it. So he translated the first surah, which was easy enough to do, 7 verses, and he got done that. Then he got to surah number 2. And at surah number 2, when you starts off and it says, in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, and then the first verse is 3 mystic letters, A-L-M, Alif, Lam, Mim. And he stopped cold in his tracks and he says, what do these mystic letters mean? Alif, Lam, Mim. And then, of course, in the Quran of the 114 surahs, 29 of them, that's a key number again, 29. The day out of time is the 29th day after the first day of the cosmic moon. This is a key code number. There's 29 surahs in the Quran that have these mystic letters in front of them, and through the history of the Quran, nobody could figure out what they meant. Why were these letters here? People gave them different kinds of meanings, but clearly they had some function or some purpose. So Rashad Khalifa decided to subject the entire Quran to a computer analysis. He said, well, the thing that's available now that wasn't available in Muhammad's time is we got the computer. I'm going to put this whole thing through a computer and see if I can figure this out. And so as he did that, in 1970, after he began this process, he did his pilgrimage to Mecca, the Hajj, and he had a great revelation or vision. It was interesting. That was in the year 13 in the Arab lunar year 1391, which again is multiples of 13. 13 and then 91 is 13 times 7. That he had a great vision and visitation. And very similar to Muhammad, was taken to the far ends of the universe. He saw the prophets. He could recognize some of them. And then they said, you've got a big mission. Go back. So he went back to Tucson with his computer. And in 1974, he finally figured it out, that those letters were a key to a mathematical code, that the entire Quran is based on a very intricate mathematical structure based on the number 19. Bismillah-ir-Rahman-ir-Rahim consists of 19 Arabic letters. He started putting an analysis of the different mystic letters in front of the 29 surahs, and he found out that they all were functions of values of 19. He went through and found out how many times those letters appeared throughout the entire Quran. And then one of the great mysteries of the Quran was that all of the surahs except for one, surah number 9, are prefaced by the Bismillah-ir-Rahman-ir-Rahim. And he said, well, without that Bismillah-ir-Rahman-ir-Rahim, in front of surah 9, the Bismillah-ir-Rahman-ir-Rahim only appears 113 times, and that's not a multiple of 19. Then he discovered that in surah 27, in verse 30, which represents Solomon presenting a letter to Sheba, the phrase appears there, and he says, there it is. That's the 114th time it appears. Also, the whole of this comes down to a cryptic verse in Surah 74, which is the hidden secret is the name of that surah, and again, verse 30 of Surah 74 says, over it is 19. And he said, and then that also struck him as to be the key of the code. By 1980, Rashad Khalifa had published, had done his first translation of the Quran and published his research findings, and he received wide acclaim. His research findings were picked up, and they were published in the Scientific American and many other scientific journals, and said the miracle of the Quran, someone has finally cracked the code, and the mystery of the Quran, it's based on an intricate mathematical code. Incidentally, we all know the Masonic order, and the highest order of the Masons is the 33rd degree. In the grand Scottish Rite Shrine building in Washington, D.C., when you go, and this was my very close friend Tainetta Muhammad had this experience. She was able to go into the inner sanctum room, the 33rd degree room of the Masonic order, Scottish Rite order, in Washington. And this room is it's absolutely bare, and there's only one thing there on the table, and that's the Holy Quran. They keep that from the people, but that's the one text that's there of the 33rd degree Masons. Okay? But the Masons keep knowledge from the people, and this is a very, very good example of that. That's very interesting. It's the only text, not the Bible, nothing else, but the Quran. That's what's in there. That the 33rd degree Masons, you know, the Shriners, okay, in this country, that's all with the Fez and the Order of Medina and all that. That's because of the 33rd degree Masons based on the Quran. But they won't tell you that. They won't tell you that that's where all that stuff comes from. So Rashad Khalifa received wide acclaim, but that year in 1980, Tainetta Muhammad, who was the last wife and widow of Elijah Muhammad, the founder of the Nation of Islam, the controversial black Muslims in this country. Elijah Muhammad was a very profound man. He was visited on July 4th, 1930, by an even more mysterious person known as Fard Muhammad, who was actually a very enlightened master who came from the Caucasus to look for Elijah Muhammad. He found him on July 4th in Detroit, Michigan, and said, okay, and he was giving a talk in a park, and he said, okay, you come with me, and for 3.5 years, Fard Muhammad taught Elijah Muhammad. And Elijah Muhammad said that he made Elijah Muhammad live with him, and Elijah Muhammad said, you know, I never saw him sleep. He would go look in a door, through the door, and he was always awake. And basically, what did Fard Muhammad teach Elijah Muhammad was a lot of interplanetary history. The last teachings that Elijah Muhammad gave in 1973 and 74 are 22 lectures called The Theology of Time. And this was the big message that was left. Then after he gave those lectures, he took Tainetta and their children and went to Cuernavaca, Mexico, and told Tainetta, you have to be here, you have to study the world calendars, and you have to look for the messages that come from the prophecies of this land. In 1975, Elijah Muhammad departed and left Tainetta with all of his final instructions. Tainetta in 1980 had known about Rashad Khalifa and traveled to Tucson to visit with Rashad Khalifa, and there she learned about the 19 code. And then 7 years later, Tainetta happened to be in Egypt. Someone said, hey, go to the Great Pyramid, the harmonic convergence is happening. She said, what's that? Someone gave her a copy of the Mayan factor, and she said, oh, I see, this is the 19 code. So she went to Rashad Khalifa and said, you know, you have to, you know that there's more to this 19 code than just what's in the Quran. You have to go, it's in the Mayan calendar too. And Taineta, when she found this out also, then she knew she had to find us. She came and found Bolanik and myself in 1988, the first time we came out to do anything public after the harmonic convergence and the death of my son. We were at a Peace Through Education conference in Texas, and she came and found us there and said, you know, I've got to maintain communication with you. After that, we took off and began our mission of the discovery of the law of time, and which we did on December. The beginning of that, of course, was on December 10th, the self-existing dragon when we were in the Museum of Time in Geneva, and we came back to Hawaii then late January of 1990. That's when we returned to Hawaii. Unbeknownst to us at this time, although Taineta had gotten to Rashad Khalifa and said, "Hey, you've got to study the Mayan calendar. It's got the 019 code, and see what's happening there." Before anything else could happen, Rashad Khalifa was assassinated. When Rashad Khalifa published his work, his scientific work on the mathematical code of the Quran, first he received tremendous acclaim from everybody, especially in the Islamic world. But then he went and said, well, now that we know that the Quran is absolutely mathematical, we know that it is the absolute word of God, therefore we don't need the Hadith and the Sunnah. And so all of his books were burned by the Saudi Arabians when they were published in Lebanon. They were all gathered and burned, and he knew he was under fire. He had a little mosque in Tucson. You go down 6th Street in Tucson and you see a big sign there that says, "Happiness is submission to the will of God." And he had his little mosque there. He knew what was coming. He was 54 years old on January 31st of 1990. The last thing he wrote was about a little article about how martyrs don't die, they go immediately to paradise. And this is published at this time, right when he died. He said, and in this article he said, martyrs don't die, they actually go to heaven. And he says very much like if you become a martyr, that suddenly, boom, if you're killed, then it's like, he says, it's like you go to Hawaii where your relatives are waiting for you. And this is where we were. Taineta came to us shortly after that and told us about the 19 code. And we knew that, for instance, in the dream spell, all the planetary partners, for instance, Neptune is dragon, which is 1, in mirror, which is 18. That equals 19. Pluto is storm, 19, and sun, 0, which is 19. Uranus is earth, 17, and wind, 2, which is 19. So we knew that that 19 code was totally woven into all of this. So I was very curious about this, and as I said, I felt a very strong connection actually between Valum Votan and Muhammad. So in 1972, when we presented the dream spell, 92, excuse me, when we presented the dream spell in Cuernavaca, we presented it at the house of Elijah Muhammad in Cuernavaca, and I had a very strong transmission of the connection there between Muhammad and Quetzalcoatl. And this is why Elijah Muhammad told Taineta to look for someone who was bringing the prophecies of Mexico into the present time. And this one I knew that Quetzalcoatl was actually the special voice of Muhammad, that Muhammad was the last prophet in the old world, and that then there had to be a transmission of this coming in the new world. And so in it was Taineta Muhammad, of course, who came on the day out of time in 1993 with her son Ishmael, and she gave to me the little book, De Tolan La Lejana, from distant Tolan, which had been given to her by a Mayan healer to give specifically to me. And so I knew that we were involved in a very big mystery play. So that when we went back to Mexico with the prophecy, we spent a bit of time at the house of Muhammad in Cuernavaca, and on the day Cosmic Storm, Kin 39, December 28, 1993. I said, you know, I've never actually read the Quran. Could you give us a Quran? So she gave us a Quran. It was Kin 39, and so the first thing I did on the bus to Mexico City was read Surah 39, which I felt, since it was the Kin 39. Surah 39 is a very, very key surah. I'm currently in my 25th consecutive reading of the Quran. I have not stopped reading the Quran. I read it every day in the morning and in the evening as part of my spiritual practice. So I've read it 24 times consecutively, and I'm in the 25th consecutive reading. And that Surah 39 has 75 verses, and 39 and 75 is 114, which again is 19 times 6. So I also found it interesting that Rashad Khalifa was assassinated when he was 54, and he didn't quite get to the Mayan 019 code. And when I began my time as a messenger, I began it when I was 54. So I saw that later on I saw that I was literally picking up where Khalifa had left off. I didn't have time to do anything more than to keep reading the Quran during the time of our travels as a planetary messenger. But an interesting thing happened, and that was in 1996 when we began to start to look for some type of base in North America. My daughter Tara had moved to Tucson, and so that more than anything, I said, well, let's go visit Tara in Tucson. And we decided that we would set up a base in Tucson in 1996. We were still doing a lot of traveling, but we had a base that we set up there. And then after the World Congress and the Law of Time, and then a final visit to Hawaii in 1997, we went back to Tucson to live for a couple of years, or maybe a year and a half. And it was at that time that I finally said, okay, well, I'm in Tucson, and Rashad Khalifa was in Tucson. I might as well pick up where he left off. And it was very interesting because while we were living in Tucson, at this time also we were continuing our efforts at involving the Vatican in our work in terms of the calendar reform. And as it turned out, we found out that the Vatican Observatory, the Specola Vaticana, has its North American office in Tucson. They have a big observatory at Kitt Peak. They're doing a lot of damage on Mount Graham, trying to build another observatory there against the Mojave Indians' best intentions and wishes. But the very head of the Vatican Observatory spends 6 months a year in Tucson. So, and we found out that was less than a mile from where we were living in Tucson. And then when we went back to look for Rashad Khalifa's mosque, that was less than a mile from where we were living. And we found then that we were all living that the Vatican Observatory, Rashad Khalifa's mosque, and where we were living, where we were decoding the 20 tablets in the 7777, were all in the same zip code, 857, which is 3 times 19, 19. So we were all there. So I intensified my study here. My basic premise was, if the law of time is true, and it will be affirmed in the Quran. If the Quran is true and is supposedly the last criterion, it will have the law of time within it. And just as Rashad Khalifa had found the 19 code in the Quran, I felt I would be able to find the law of time 13 and 7 code in the Quran. So I began with this premise, and it took me. I was able to find a number of Rashad Khalifa's books, including the final. Just before he died, he completed his final translation of the Quran, which is called the Quran, the Final Testament. And he's somewhat fanatical in his own right, but it's a very clear text. And so I was able to begin to study this, and then and one night then in 1998, after finding all I could about Khalifa and going to the library there, I went there and I read about his assassination. It was very interesting. They wouldn't release the cause of his death for 4 or 5 days afterwards, and the FBI was already present when he was assassinated, and it turned out to be some type of Islamic group, which interestingly enough, and this seemed very odd, this Islamic group was based in Colorado Springs. If you know, Colorado Springs is full of golf courses in the U.S. military, so it's a weird place for an Islamic group to be based. So I thought, well, that's really odd stuff. And it was very interesting because as I was intensifying my studies there, the Taineta Mohammed came to visit us in Tucson late in September of 1998, and I kept saying to Bo and Nick, Taineta Mohammed's coming to visit us in Tucson. It's just like when she came to visit Rashad Khalifa in 1980, and we were going to on our bikes to a place where we go swimming, and in front of that place I noticed that morning of the day that Taineta was coming, with in the Tucson morning newspaper there was a big headline. It said embassy bombers linked to Tucson cleric's death. I said, what? And because this was just after the Tanzania and the Kenya embassy bombings in Africa, and I said, and Tucson cleric's death, and I looked there, and there, sure enough, it said that the people who bombed the embassies in Tanzania and Kenya were linked to the death of Rashad Khalifa 8 years earlier. And I said, wow, this is really bizarre stuff. And I showed this to Taineta and some of the people that she came with, and she said, you better get out of town. Well, we shortly after that, I was trying to figure out, no, I've got to find out the key. Is that if the law of time is true, it's going to be in the Holy Quran, and I'm going to find the 19 code verified in the Tzolk'in somehow. And first of all, I figured out there's 6 surahs that are multiples of 19: 19, 38, 57, 76, 95, and 114. And I was lying in bed one night, and I'd read it enough so I knew the number of verses in these surahs. And I added them up, and the number of verses in all those surahs combined is 260. I said, okay, there we go. And that was very much like when I discovered that the square of 8 adds up to 260 in each row, and I said, okay, if there's 6 surahs that are multiples of 19, the total sum of verses is 260. There it is. And then I went and made another discovery. I said, okay, I'm going to find out where those multiples of 19 are in the Tzolk'in. And it's very clear. I looked at it, and here there's 13, the multiples of 19. If you take the kin numbers, if you have one of those little calendars that has the kin numbers on them, you'll see this. But the 19, this is the first 19. This is kin 19. Over here, 12 mirror, that's kin 38. This 5 earth, kin 57. 11 warrior, that's kin 76. The 4 eagle, that's kin 95. The 10 wizard here is kin 114. That's John Lennon. Then right here in the middle, this is the key. Kin 133, this 19 times 7, of course, is right here. It's Skywalker, 3 Skywalker, electric Skywalker, kin 133, Skywalker 13, tone 3, 133. And this is 19 times 7. And 19 times 8 is the 9 human, which is 152. Lunar monkey, 171, 19 times 9. 19 times 10 is the 8 dog, which is kin 190. 19 times 11, interestingly enough, is kin 209, the entrance into the Green Central Castle. 19 times 11. 19 times 12, kin 228, which is the 7 star, and then 19 times 13, kin 247. Okay, so I saw, wow, that's really something. That creates one perfect strand that goes up through the tzolk'in. And I looked and I studied all the other kin numbers. No other number does that. It's the one. I found out. Okay, 19 is the one constant. And then I found out when you look at the other kin numbers, like for instance, this is kin 10, and this is right here. This one here is kin 29. The difference between all the other kin numbers in this diagonal row are always 19. So the whole of the tzolk'in is stitched by this 19 code. Now it's interesting that this sequence runs from here, from kin 19 up to kin 7, because the two real key numbers are 7 and 19. The first surah has 7 verses, and the first verse has 19 letters. So and I started look. Everything going this way is the kin numbers are all difference of 19. This is the perfect strand. It's the only strand where it's all the multiples of the same number. It's the perfect strand in the tzolk'in, running that way. The other, if you go this direction, they're all multiples of 21, which is base 7. Okay. If you go from here, there's the only other. If you take this. Going from this is where the 19 strand ends here. You start this 7 strand with 777 right here. That runs down and completes itself here. Kin 259, which is storm, which is code 19, is 37 times 7. And then if you go through here and say, okay, where are the other places where you see these multiples of 7? You have here, which is from 14, okay, 14, and then 14 and 21 is 35. That strand goes all the way down to here. There's actually 4 strands where are the perfect multiples of 21, or where you can see the multiples of 7 and 21, and there's 37 of those numbers there, which is the 37 times 7 that appears down here. Then I said, okay, but the important thing was that I found was that the 19 strand was absolutely constant. Okay, that's the only number that has multiples of itself that appears absolutely perfect when you take I'm talking about the kin numbers. Okay, so then I said, well, one thing I got to figure out is this. And that's when you write 19, and this again is the 19 and 7 factor. 19 is written with 7 notational symbols, 1, 2, 3 plus 4 dots, 3 bars plus 4 dots. It's 7 notational symbols. Then I started saying, how do you write 19 times 2, 38? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Same number of notational symbols. How do you write 3 times 19? That's 57. Okay, and this equals 20, remember, and this equals 18, which that's 38. Equals 2 times 19. Let's look at 57. 57, you write like this. +40 plus 17 equals 57. And again, 1, 2, 3 bars and 4 dots. It's 19 is the only, and then I tested this out with other numbers in the galactic notation. 19 is the only number that remains constant. Absolutely constant. No matter what multiple it is, it's always written with the same number, 3 bars and 4 dots. You take the final number, which is kin 247, which is 19 times 13, interestingly enough, and that's code. That's written. 247 is written like this: 12 times, in the 20 position, that's 240, and then 7. And again, 1, 2, 3 bars, and 4 dots. That's 13. That's plus 7 here. That's 247, which is 19 times 13. So I found that, like it says in the Quran, 19 is overall, that in the Tzolk'in also, we'd seen that the 019 code, and that also then that the one perfect strand in the Tzolk'in, where it's all the same number and its multiples, is the 19 strand, which goes, as I said, from 6 storm up to 13 hand, which is again the 13-7 principle. If you look in today's solar biotelepathic strand, it's 13.7. Okay, the ultimate 19 factor in the Tzolk'in is code 7, tone 13. Okay, the 13-7, which is the same as this 19 times 13, 247. The one exception that you get to this, there's several exceptions. I won't go into them. That you can find in your 28 meditations, but there's a few numbers that are multiples of 19 but actually resolve to be the same 3 bars and 4 dots. And the one super exception, which is 399. Okay, 399, which is 19 plus 38 plus 57 up through plus 114 equals 399. That is 19 times 21. 19 and 21 are the two. All the differences in the kin numbers. If you go this direction, all the differences are 19. If you go this direction, all the differences are 21, okay? So, and if you add 19 plus 38 plus 57 up to plus 114, that number is 399, and 399 is written, that's 19 times 20, which is 380, and plus, so it's the super 19. Because it's written 19.19. It's the super 19. It's written with 14 notational symbols. It's the only exception. It's the super 19. And it's 19.19, which 19.19 is actually 19 times 21. And 21 is the factor of 7. I know I'm going through this relatively quickly, but that's some of my breathless excitement at the mathematical discovery that the value that Rashad Khalifa discovered as being the mathematical determining value of the entire mathematical structure of the Quran has also confirmed in the Tzolk'in and in the Mayan galactic mathematical system, so that all the multiples of 19 are always 19, always add up to 19. It's similar in the decimal system with the power of 9. All multiples of 9 always add up to 9. Okay, that 45, which is 9 times 5, 4 and 5 are 9, or 81, which is 9 squared, is 8 plus 1 equals 9. So there's a similar value there. So I saw then that there's the 9, which is in the decimal system, then the which is the highest number actually in the decimal system, because 10 is 0 plus 1. The 19, which is the highest value in the vigesimal system, okay? And so then the other number is 29. So there's three constants that have the 9 in them. And this is verified in the oracle board. In the oracle board, we know that all of the oracles, the sum of the destiny kin and the analog kin is always 19. But what I also discovered is that half the oracles, when you add the analog plus the antipode, 10 of the oracles they equal 29, and 10 of the oracles they equal 9. So this is the 9 1929 constant factor. These are mathematical principles, demonstrations of the law of time, that the law of time is coded in that the law of time has these codes as part of the constants in the whole system. So the other side of it was finding the law of time in the Quran. Okay, so I said the first thing I found was that if you take the 6 surahs that are multiples of 19, they have a sum total of 260 verses. Then I noticed that if you take the surahs that are so-called the mystical, the 29 mystical surahs, which are called the al-muqattat surahs, that these surahs I looked and I noticed some interesting things, that especially there's a couple of surahs that are very important, and that's Surah 7 and Surah 13, which of course we're dealing with the 7 and the 13. Those are both al-muqattats, and they have mystic letters, and those are the only 2 surahs with 4 mystic letters in front of them, so they're profoundly connected. I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but the number of times that all those mystic letters occur in each of those surahs, in the Surah 13, I believe they occur 1,352 times 1352, which is 13 times 104, and in the 7th surah, they're all multiples of 7. So I began to find many instances where indeed the law of time was absolutely coded into the Quran. So as I continued my studies of the Quran, I wrote a text about this, which is called The Holy Quran and the Law of Time, 19 equals 260, an investigation of the mathematical cosmology unifying the Holy Quran and the science of fourth dimensional time as decoded from the tomb of Valum Votan. So I was able to find all the numbers of the tomb intrinsically coded within the Holy Quran. There's 3 surahs that have 52 verses, and 2 of those, the last of those, there's 14 has 52 verses, and that one's called Abraham. And as I said, the Abraham and Valum Votan have an antipode relation in the 13 Baktun cycle map. And then the other 2 surahs that have 52 verses I found interesting are surahs 68 and 69, and 68 is the last of the al-muqattat surahs, the 29th of the al-muqattat surahs, and then there's also just 2 surahs that have 28 verses. I found that interesting. Those 2 surahs are 71 and 72, and that Surah 71 is entitled Noah, and Surah 72 is entitled the Jinn. Well, the Jinn refers to spirit entities, spiritual creatures, fourth dimensional entities, or aliens or foreigners. And the 72, I thought, well, that's very interesting. It has 28 verses. Now I thought, well, this surah, I think, has a lot to do with Valum Votan, because in the 72nd calendar round, following 3113, and that 72nd calendar round, Valum Votan was born, and when that calendar round was completed, he was 28 years old. Okay. Then the 73rd calendar round was the 52-year cycle of power of Muhammad. And so I thought that was very interesting, because when you read the Surah 72, which has 28 verses, in that 72nd calendar round, Valum Votan completed his 28th year. And it starts off and it says, "Say, I was inspired that a group of jinns listened, then said, we have heard a wonderful Quran. It guides to righteousness, and we have believed in it. We will never set up any idols beside our Lord. The Most High is our only Lord. He never had a mate nor a son," etc. So in the last verses of that which are very interesting. From verses 26 to 28, it says, "He is the knower of the future. He does not reveal the future to anyone. Only to a messenger that he chooses does he reveal from the past and the future specific news. This is to ascertain that they have delivered their Lord's messages. He is fully aware of what they have. He has counted the numbers of all things." So there's a very strong reference there to the mathematical codes. Then it's interesting that the next Surah 73 confirms then the 019 code. It's divided into two sections. The first section is verses 1 to 19, and the second section is simply verse 20. Okay. And verse 20, which would be the 0 verse, verse 20 in this surah, it's called the cloaked, the one who's cloaked. He says the one who's wrapped up, and in the 20th verse is a very long verse, and in that verse the word God or Allah appears exactly 7 times, and it's in the whole surah. That's the number of times that the word God appears 7 times in that verse. And this 019 code, the 7 is the key factor between the 13 and the 20, and the midpoint between 1 and 13 is the 7. So I found that very much confirmed. And of course the 73rd calendar round, that was the time of Valum Votan's time of power. Okay, and you have the whole 019 code presented in the mathematical structure of that surah. Then, and it's interesting then that following that, the 74th surah, which is called the Hidden Secret, is the surah that has the statement in verse 30 at 19, above it is 19 or over it is 19, and that it was in the 74th calendar round that the tomb was built, and that's the hidden secret. And the hidden secret of the 19 is encoded in the tomb, and it's encoded in the Holy Quran. So that's why it was only after the tomb was opened that the DNA was discovered and that the electromagnetic field was discovered. That was after the tomb was opened that Rashad Khalifa came to America, to North America, the place where the tomb was, and decoded the mathematical code of the Quran, the 19 code of that structure. As I continued my studies of this, and what I realized is that once you have the understanding of the law of time, then you can read the Quran, and there's another Quran there. I call this the radial Quran. And the radial Quran is what opens up when you understand the basic numbers of the law of time, and then everything is dependent upon the verses. I mean, this is 114 chapters or surahs, and every single verse is numbered, and so then it's the numbers of the verses that then begin to talk to you. I said, well, it says, and there's been a lot of interesting work that's been done in the Quran in the last few years. One scholar has discovered how the velocity of light is coded into the numbers, and another person has discovered the DNA code in it. So the mathematics of the Quran, which underlies the whole structure and the message is very simple. You know, there's only one God. Don't have any idols. Just we're here on this earth, just worship God alone. And the other message of the Quran, Islam means peace, submission to the will of God. But Islam's secondary meaning is that Islam is the law of nature. That's why it says biospheric Islam. Everything says all of nature itself is the revelation of God. The biosphere is the revelation of God. The biosphere is divine nature. And there's just continuous passages. All the images in the Quran pertain to that. And so there's a lot of very powerful statements that are made. This is Surah 2, verse 164, and this is very typical. There's 5 different levels of imagery here, which refer actually to natural laws. and this says, in the creation of the heavens and the earth. 1. The alternation of night and day. 2. The ships that roam the ocean for the benefit of the people. 3. The water that God sends down from the sky to revive dead land and spread in it all kinds of creatures. 4. And the manipulation of the winds and the clouds that are placed between the sky and the earth. There are sufficient proofs for people who understand. It says, if you want to understand and know God, just live in nature. And just study nature. And it says in the Surah 6, verse 59, with him are all the keys to all the secrets. None knows them except he. He knows everything on land and in the sea. Not a leaf falls without his knowledge, nor is there a grain in the depths of the soil, nor is there anything wet or dry that is not recorded in a profound record. And verse 38 of that same says, all the creatures on earth and all the birds that fly with wings are communities like you. We did not leave anything out of this book. To their Lord, all these creatures will be summoned. So what's that? That's what we keep saying. All the communities are organized by the telepathy. They form their communities that way. It says all the communities, they're all communities just like you. Don't think they're not different than your communities, because everything is obedient to the same divine law. So as I continued to read that, I said, well, if everything is supposed to be in there, what about the Rainbow Bridge? What about the Rainbow Bridge? I found out many things. The story of Adam, occurs 7 times in the Quran. And the surahs that it appears in, 2, 7, 15, 17, 18, 20, 38, those add up to 117. And I thought, well, that's good. The only time Valum Votan is mentioned in the Telektanon is in verse 117. I said, okay. And the Valum Votan is sent for the resurrection of the Adam Kadmon, as we woke yesterday, to break the shattering, to replace, to make it whole again. I said, well, that's interesting. I said, how many times does verse 117 occur in the Quran? I counted all the surahs that it occurs: 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 11, 16, 20, 23, 26, and 37. Exactly 13 surahs where verse 117 appears. What's 117? 9 times 13. And when I added up those surahs add up to the number 169, which is 13 squared. So this is the law of time, the power of 13 and 7, as it's coded into the Quran. And I said, well, looks like even the Valum Votan is coded into that in terms of the just taking the one reference in the Telektanon. So I said, well, in the Rainbow Bridge, is that in there? The Rainbow Bridge, when we're talking about them, we'll talk a little bit more this afternoon too. The Rainbow Bridge. Well, we're looking at the Rainbow Bridge. It's a double rainbow around the earth, and the one rainbow refers to what's called the day alternator, and the other rainbow refers to the night alternator. The day alternator is the function of the photonic transmissions that come from the sun, and the night alternator is involved with the psychoactive regeneration of those photons in the night. Okay, so the day alternator and the night alternator have been functioning unconsciously and invisibly. There is a difference between day and night. The day is filled with photons, the night is not filled with photons. There is an alternation that occurs. And I saw, like, for instance, in that verse that I read you, verse 164, Surah 2, the second cosmic principle after the creation of the heavens and the earth is the alternation of night and day. And this image appears quite often in the Quran, that the day and night alternate. So I said, well, how often is the principle of day and night, the creation of day and night as a principle. That is the Quran, you begin to see the Quran actually describes mathematical principles, very much based on the law of alternation and complementaries, heaven and earth, day and night, sun and moon. The principle of day and night occurs 28 times in the Quran, which is the cycle, of course, the 28-day cycle. And so when I saw that when we're looking at the Rainbow Bridge, that basically the Earth floats in its orbit between the day and night alternators of the Rainbow Bridge. And there are three very interesting verses that I found in the Quran that refer to this. In Surah 21, verse 33, it says, and of course 33 is the mystic 33rd, and he is the one who created the night and the day and the sun and the moon, each floating in its own orbit. Okay, so the day and the night alternators create, as it were, the cosmic ocean in which the earth floats in its orbit, just as the sun and the moon. And then similar passage occurs in Surah 36 and verse 40. The sun is never to catch up with the moon, the night and the day never deviate. Each of them is floating in its own orbit. It's not just the sun and the moon that are floating in the orbit, but the night and the day that are floating in the orbit. And the night and the day floating in their orbit is the day alternator and the night alternator of the Rainbow Bridge. So I found one other verse that has a reference to that, again in Surah 39, and it's in verse 5. And you can hold that up as I read it. Okay? He created the heavens and the earth truthfully. He rolls the night over the day and rolls the day over the night. He committed the sun and the moon, each running for a finite period. Absolutely, he is the Almighty, the Forgiving. So that's the night rolling over the day and the day rolling over the night. When the Rainbow Bridge, the earth is rotating and the night alternator rolls over, and then the day alternator rolls over. So this is the description of the day and night alternators rolling over the earth as the earth floats in its orbit, just as the sun and the moon float in their orbit. Okay. So those, I looked and I said, well, those are the three most critical verses that describe this principle of the day-night alternation of the earth floating in its orbit and of the day rolling over the night and the night rolling over the day as the two aspects of the Rainbow Bridge. So I took and I added up the surah number and the verse. 21 and 33 equals 54, 36 and 40 equals 76, and 39 and 5 equals 44, and when they're all added up, they equal 174. 174 is 29 times 6. 6 is the number of the cube, and 29 is the day out of time. It's the 29th, when you count after a cosmic moon, 28, then the 29th day after a cosmic moon, 28 is 29. It's the 29th day. It's the only time there is a 29th day following it in the sequence starting with 1. And the power of the cube, which is the power of the law of time. So I figured, well, okay, that is the finding the mathematical evidence in the Quran, as well as the verses that describe the principle of the Rainbow Bridge in the Quran. So, with these demonstrations, I'm just completing then my work. My work has been, it says in Surah 21, which is the prophets, in verse 24. And 24 is the code number of Velatropa, and 24 in the Gregorian calendar was the date of my birthday, and also in the 13 moon calendar that's the same as resonant moon 15, which is Dali, and then when you add the two previous Dalis, 1 and 8 to 15, that also is 24. And in 24 it says that this is the message to my generation, consummating all previous messages. That during the 7 years of prophecy, that it was my mission was to unravel the law of time, to describe the different levels of the law of time, and as I described yesterday, how the law of time then provides us the tools and the knowledge so that we can actually participate in the second creation. The final stage of my work had to do with demonstrating that if the final criterion, the final revelation of the historical cycle in the old world was the text that is known as the Quran, and this text is based on a mathematical structure that is embedded in the number 19, then the final task I had in terms of demonstrating the law of time and the universality of the law of time was to show that the principle of 19 was the constant in the Tzolk'in. That was the one constant, that one diagonal strand is the only strand where all the numbers are the multiples of that same number, and that the number 19 is always written as 19 when it's written in galactic notation. So this confirmed what it says in the Quran, and that further then that if the Tzolk'in is based on the principle of the 13 and the 7, which create the 20, that the 13 and the 7 are going to be found as key parts, as key numbers in the Quran. Of the Al-Muqattat surahs, as I said, Surah 7 and 13 are unique. They each have 4 letters, and so that's a demonstration of the 13 and the 7. You add 7 to the 13, and you have Surah 20, which is also an Al-Muqattat surah, is also one of the surahs where the story of Adam occurs, and is also one of the surahs that has 117 verses. So this work was the completion of the basic part of the mathematical demonstration to say yes, because it says in the Quran, any truth that's revealed is always going to confirm all previous truth. And so it was especially important that as I said, if the Quran was the last text revealed in the old world, that it was going to be confirmed and affirmed by the law of time. And so this actually completes the mathematical demonstration. It's my responsibility to present this to you just as a part of the proofs of the law of time. I'm not trying to tell anyone that they should become a Muslim or anything like that. I'm just saying that this is a mathematical demonstration, and that on the other hand, also that's a very interesting book, the Quran. I found the only other book like the Quran was really the I Ching, but the Quran is even more mathematical and precise than the I Ching. And just because it was written in Arabic, an Arabic Quran, as it says, it's obviously a universal text with a universal message. More important, that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught, and that's that Islam is mathematics, and mathematics is Islam. Islam is submission to the will of God. Islam is the revelation of divine law as nature, that nature itself is the revelation of God. If we can live completely in the natural cycles, then we are living in we are living in divine revelation. That nature itself is the temple. And so this is that when we get to that point, realize that we could actually live like this. We don't need any law. The Quran doesn't talk about government. It doesn't talk about law. It says it's the only law that you need is submission to the will of God and to live according to the laws of nature.
Simply to state again, to divine and to be divined, that according to the law of time, it is time that informs us. So all of you who have been working for some time with this material will see there's a Skywalker. If you can bring that up, that one, you got it. If you bring it up, I can talk about it better. I'm just going to take a minute so you understand how from the point, thank you so much, that how from the base point, right here, the first year, the dolly, the first seal, earth. So that's how we have the 20 tablets of the law of time incorporating the 64 hexagrams. And then that's how we have the runes, Teutonic runes, that are also in ancient form being brought forward in time. So everything is applied in time according to the synchronic order. So rather than divination that comes from you randomly throwing yarrow sticks for the I Ching, for example, or picking a rune, we're now applying these levels to actual divination through time, where time is the ordering. And then here we are, very point of the Rainbow Bridge, which is when everything goes into a completely radial form, and we have the future. The future comes to us, and we actually leave that old millennium of 1260 time. So this afternoon, we will have the presentation and the gifting of the 7777. So enjoy your lunch and enjoy your final meeting with your Earth families. And please remember, it will be facilitated for others. So please concentrate in your Earth families today on how you're going to proceed, to stay in touch, to work with the information, and how this will become a rolling time wave.